Okay by that first slide and can hear me okay? Do let us know if that's not the case. I've got some thumbs up. That's great. So my name's Talsha, and today is my youngest daughter's birthday. I'm just looking at the date on the slide. She's 7 today, so just a bit of sharing there from me. At the minute, I work 4 days a week as a support and development manager for the professional support and wellbeing team within NHS England Southwest. And what that translates as is I provide a lot of one-to-one coaching support to doctors in training, dentists in training, and pre-reg pharmacists as well across the Southwest. So I am a trained coach. I have a background in psychology and a master's in occupational psychology. One day a week, I also work as a health and wellbeing program manager within primary care. I was doing that full time on a 12-month secondment until October, and now I'm just doing it, carrying forward some of that one day a week for the next 12 months. So that's a bit about me, and my email address is there. So if during this session you have any questions afterwards or would like to ask me anything, please do reach out and drop me an email. But I was asked to deliver this session, and really what I hope to do is sort of share my own experience of using positive psychology in my coaching practice with you. And to just share with you what I find useful, and perhaps you will find it useful in your practice too, if you're a coach, and maybe it will get you thinking about ways in which you can use it. So we will be doing a lot of this work where I will share a particular model or approach, and I'd like you to try it yourself. And obviously, when we do that and we go into smaller groups, you might want to be sharing things with the people you're teamed up with in those groups. And so it's really important that obviously we have that level of trust and compassion and respect in those sessions. So I sort of put that in there as a kind of an expectation. And I would say, don't share anything that is going to be upsetting for you or that you don't feel comfortable sharing. Only share what is it within your comfort zone, and don't feel that you have to overshare when you don't feel comfortable doing that. So just want to share that, and obviously then keep what you've heard from those in this session confidential, if they have shared with you something personal to themselves. So this is what we'll be going through, a brief outline of what positive psychology is. And I know Rachel McCoubrey's on the call. So Rachel, I know that this is an area of interest for you. So please do contribute, share. And if any of the rest of you also have experience with positive psychology, please do contribute and share, because these sessions are enriched by that. And then I'm going to share how it links with coaching, and then we'll look at those specific models that I found useful. And there are loads, so I can only pick a certain amount for this length of session. And then we'll do a bit of feedback and wrap up at the end as a group. Please, if you have any questions throughout, put them in the chat, or you could, it's probably good to put them in the chat so we can sort of use them when we have a moment to review them, rather than lots of hands up throughout the session, but there will be opportunities to ask things. So let's get to know you a bit. I've told you about me. I'd love to know, who you are, where you're coming from, what you'd like from this session, and whether you use positive psychology already in your coaching practice. Maybe you dabble, maybe you're really experienced. It'd be great to know that. So who wants to go first? Anyone? Well, what we'll do is we'll build in some time for you to practice some of this with each other, so that will give you that that chance to do that. I'm conscious of time, and just actually to get round you all is probably going to eat up our time. So if you'd like, for the rest of you, do you want to type who you are, where you're from in the chat, and just put that in, and then people can just sort of link in and connect. I'm conscious of time, my time management really with this. So let's move on to the next bits of this. Let me just get that up. So as I said, this is going to be sort of letting you know how I use positive psychology, and a bit of background on positive psychology is really that it started in the early 2000s. Um, got a lot of pushback when it started, because people saw it as a you just need to be positive all the time and not actually focus on negative events that are happening in your life. And there was pushback at that, actually. Wasn't very well received. And so actually it's been revised and refined over the years by Martin Seligman, somebody called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is the only way I know how to pronounce that surname is somebody said when you smile, it sends your cheeks high. So cheeks send me high, is how they said to pronounce his surname. Um, and really, this emerged from these psychologists in America looking at the model of psychology that had been used to date, which was largely focusing on people who weren't doing well, people who had poor mental health, and how to get them back to not feeling unwell. And they really believed that what we should be doing, we were missing a huge element of the human experience, which was, but actually, what about those people who are sort of in the moderate zone? Maybe they've been in the poor mental health and the languishing zone, and they're kind of neutral now. But how do we actually help those individuals thrive in their lives and flourish as individuals? And why hasn't psychology done research into that, and why haven't we explored that enough? So they really wanted to look at the human condition of flourishing and what are the parameters around that? What do we need to look out for? What do we need to promote there? So that's a bit of the background as to where this whole area developed from. And from there, they did extensive research. And again, this is just another way of looking at that whole area, which is, rather than taking a disease model approach, where your aim is to get people from that minus zone to the neutral zone, so the absence of illness, what does it take to get somebody in that plus zone and really move up that plus zone into they're doing really well with their health model. So going beyond that zero and into the presence of, positive emotions, a positive experience for that human in the world that is meaningful and that promotes other areas of well-being in their life. So a lot of research was done by these initial psychologists, and Martin Seligman is one of the founding leaders of this. And his book Flourish is quite a good one to read to sort of understand the evolution of this. And from that, and over several iterations of a happiness model, came the Perma model, which is what many of you will probably be familiar with if you've looked at any area of positive psychology. It is the sort of overarching model of positive psychology. And it was in 2012 that Martin reviewed his authentic happiness theory and combines, the wanting to avoid pain and attain pleasure with actually what makes life worth living. So those two different types of well-being to really form these 5 multi-dimensional areas of the human experience to help somebody flourish and thrive are the 2 words that he often uses. And those are looking at positive emotions. So this is really not about saying don't have negative emotions. The human experience has negative emotions. It has negative experiences. That is part of our lived experience. But it's to sort of ask ourselves, are we actively taking responsibility for engaging in, participating, investing in positive emotions? Or are we not? And in a way, we do have an element of choice there in some of the decisions we make in our life as to whether we engage in positive emotions, positive experiences. Equally, how engaged are we in immersing ourselves in something that feels worthwhile to us? So often, we've all been there where we find ourselves at a point where you're going, my God, I'm just on this treadmill. I don't feel very engaged in it. I'd love a break. And often that's because we're sort of spending a lot of our time, or a majority of our time, engaged in something that doesn't link in with our values or our passions or things that have meaning for us. So that engagement can drop. So it's about exploring, what does that engagement look like if we were to think about it feeling worthwhile as an individual. And a lot of that is about linking into our strengths and thinking about, what are my core strengths as a person, and how can I use those more? And often when we take that approach, we will feel a lot more engaged in things that we're doing in our lives. Relationships is an interesting one. When we have all different relationships in our lives, and sometimes we don't take the time to step back and think about, how are we connecting with people, and what are those people giving back to us? So a bit of an assessment on the relationships we have in our lives, what they're giving us, what they're perhaps taking from us, and maybe thinking about how we better connect, and ways in which we can increase relationships and connections that are going to give us energy rather than deplete our energy. Things like social isolation, for example, can often happen if we're feeling under pressure, and perhaps our mental health is suffering. We can withdraw, and so our relationships can suffer as a result of that. So sometimes when you're using this in coaching, it can be about talking about, how to re-engage with relationships that are going to be of high value. You'll notice a lot of these overlap and interlink, and that's certainly what they found in their research, was that they're all interlinked. Meaning, I've mentioned it in engagement, but really thinking with purpose about, are we engaging with something that feels purposeful, that we feel connected to? Something larger than ourselves is how Martin Seligman described it. When we see something as meaningful, as of a greater, something greater than ourselves, we can get a lot from that. And often we're not thinking in that way in modern life. We're just trying to get through the endless to-do list, which often doesn't feel that meaningful. And then accomplishment is the last one. So we as humans need to feel like we're striving for something and we're moving towards something. But what those goals are can be dictated by others, can be dictated by ourselves, can be a combination of both. And so that sense of accomplishment, how we feel like we're attaining things and growing as an individual, can fluctuate over time. And so it's the fifth area. And so what the research around this that Seligman did found was that if we attend to these 5 areas and we really give them time and attention, it can really help to develop our sense of well-being, and our sense of a positive experience in the world. Any questions about the Perma model or positive psychology before I move on to how it fits with coaching, and any sort of thoughts or comments? Yeah, you can see everybody's introduced themselves in the chat, so thanks for that. Okay, I'll continue then, but do feel free to ask any questions in the chat. So how does this fit with coaching practice? Well, Jenny Rogers, her 2012 book on coaching skills, her handbook of coaching skills, identified sort of 6 founding principles of coaching. And I think with those, when I think about using positive psychology and coaching, I'm thinking of how resourceful the client is and how can I use positive psychology to increase their resourcefulness to help themselves. So in a way, maybe we're stepping into a bit of a sharing and education type role, but still not finding the answers for the person. They're still going to do that themselves. But by sharing the Perma model, for example, or some of the other models I'm going to share with you, you can increase that individual's resourcefulness to figure things out themselves. And again, the Perma model really does, it's a bit of a biopsychosocial model when you look at it. It's trying to think of all the elements in a person's life. So it's not just thinking about work, it's thinking about those relationships both in and outside of work, meaning across all areas of life. So it's a nice model for encompassing all of those areas as well. And if we think about the Oscar coaching model, which I know a lot of us have sort of been trained in, then it's about thinking, in the outcomes that they want and in the situation they're finding themselves in. You might be exploring through positive psychology what helps this person thrive. When have they felt at their best and been functioning well? And what has worked before? So that's something that's often overlooked by a lot of people is, what's helped me before when I've hit challenging times. Oh, yes, I forgot that that's something that really helped me in the past. And it's interesting what people come up with there. So this is a quote from one of the books that I have in the reference list, and it's this one here. It's in the as I said, I've referenced it at the back, and you can click on the image of the book at the end of the slides and it will take you to where you can get that. I'm sure you can find it on other providers as well than the ones that I found. But essentially, it's describing it Perma and using Perma and positive psychology as a way in which you can create that awareness in your coachee. So, identifying their strengths and how they can use them, identifying what's going to help increase their engagement in activities. Maybe it's about the creation and maintenance of positive relationships, or maybe it's about managing relationships that aren't giving people that. And maybe it's about establishing a connection with something that's meaningful in their lives, or reconnection if it's dropped away, and celebrating achievements that occur along the way. So I often find that positive psychology, on the face of it, maybe because of the name, can put people off because they think it's about, you're just going to tell me to not talk about anything tough and get me to have this very skewed rose-tinted glasses view of things. But actually, when you use it in practice, I think us as coaches almost have a bit of a responsibility to engage people in a sense of hope in their lives, and that this is a really nice tool for doing that. So that's just one of my views. So if we look at the positive psychology Perma model and we look at how that would be used in coaching, the breakdown would look a bit like this. So for positive emotions, it's how we as coaches can help them build those positive emotions and challenge our natural deficit bias and increase those levels of hope. How can we as coaches help those individuals identify their strengths, particularly their signature strengths, and align those, what they're doing with values and interests that are meaningful for them? How we can think about the relationships, as I've said before, building that sense of connection to something larger than themselves, so that a lot of values and purpose comes into all of this. And how can we help our coaches set and strive for goals that are meaningful for them? And developing a growth mindset and appreciative inquiry can be really useful here. So we're going to look at 3 of those today, because we just wouldn't have the time to look at every single element of what we could do. But please do share how you think, you've used and done this in your coaching practice before. So we're going to look at positive emotions first, and how we can build this in our coaches. So I'm sure you're aware, but I find this a startling statistic when you look at it. But we as human beings have a natural tendency built into us to spend a lot of time trying to fix things that aren't working in our lives. So the ratio is said to be 80% versus 20% who focus on what's working well and capitalizing on that. It's very, very different balance here. And if we look at sort of the deficit bias a little bit more, what we find is that a lot of research seems to indicate that there is an evolutionary pattern in human beings for your brain to very, very quickly recall negative events far faster than positive events. So in studies where they have asked people in recall tests to recall negative events. It's far, far faster and readily available in our sort of storage in our brain than those positive events. And the reason for that is it's thought if your brain, if you can readily access what was a risk or a threat to you, so something negative that's happened, you're more likely, if you can recall it quickly, to avoid that in the future to keep yourself safe. So typical example of that would be avoiding a certain place where you know there was a dangerous animal. You don't go back there. You had a close call before. You will readily remember that, and you will actively avoid it to keep yourself safe. Same with something like eating poisonous berries or something like that if you had a close. So it's thought that this was an evolutionary kind of way in which we're programmed. But what it means in modern life is that what we're finding, and what I see a lot in my coaching practice, is that in people who have high pressure jobs, in fact, people who across job roles actually, will leave work ruminating over things that went bad that day. You know, we've all done it, haven't we? We've gone, my God, I can't believe that happened. And we will completely fail to remember the successful things that happened that day, the things that went well, that we contributed to. That's far harder, and our brain doesn't store it in the same way. So we have a real challenge here. If we're programmed this way, how do we overcome that? And how do we actively tackle that? Because our brains aren't going to do it automatically. And the way in which we can do that is through reprogramming the way in which we think about our days and the way in which we reflect on events. So the way I like to sort of term it is where we choose to focus our attentional spotlight. So you might find, if you actively think, what is my spotlight focusing on today at the dinner table? You might find that it's really ruminating over a lot of negative things. And just recognizing that is a really important first step. And the next thing we need to do is very consciously make an effort to recall things that went well in our day. So there's a lot of people talk a lot about 3 good things, and for some it really seems to work. And so for those who I have coached, I always introduce this as something to discuss. Are you taking the time at the end of a shift or at the end of your day to recall 3 good things that have happened? And if you want to be more specific, 3 good things happened because of you, because of your actions. That's even more meaningful. And people find that even harder actually to do, to attribute it to themselves. So when I introduce this, just people squirm with uncomfortableness because, you know, we're not a society where you boost yourself up by saying, this is something great that I did today. You know, we're not really very good at that. It's very unfamiliar. But what's been seen in the literature is that if you push through that and you do this, what you're doing is you're bringing more balance to your reflections of the day and to your outlook and how you're viewing things. So I'd love you to just, not in groups yet, but just take a couple of moments. Maybe we'll say until 22. Take a moment to reflect on what you choose to reflect on at the end of the day. Maybe this could be yesterday. And then to just see what your default is. Just see if you can identify that. But then also take some time to log down 3 good things from the past few days. And then we'll come back and just have a discussion about how that feels. Just take a few moments. I'm just looking at the chat here. Millie, you're saying you're a serial pessimist.
It's a problem.
You can foresee problems, though. There's no right or wrong, and it's not about denying those pessimistic thoughts, but it's about bringing balance back into the equation.
That's why this session's so helpful, and there's already some tips that I've learned.
I think unfortunately with a lot of well-being stuff in general, there can be a bit too much denial of what is a real human experience. Sorry, I was talking there, my mic was off. If anybody wants to share, if they're done and want to sort of talk about anything you identified, but how it felt and how writing it down felt, and whether you use this in your coaching practice, I'd be interested to hear. Lovely to see the comments as well about enforcing reflective review, which just really highlights that the brain doesn't actually want to do that. And so we do have to do the enforcement. Please feel free to unmute and share if you're.
I just wanted to add to what you were saying, because I was thinking about the 80-20% bias. It's also the focus on what we find difficult, and often we have a lot of skills and things that we find easy that we don't acknowledge.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's looking at what we're doing and going, actually, that's a skill, that's meeting that I managed, or it's actually bringing attention to the stuff that we almost like throw behind us as we carry on focusing on the problem. So if I find with patients, if they sometimes find it really hard to focus on what's worked well, is like, what's happened, what have you done today, and then identifying the skills in that, and that being coming from them and they're author of those skills, and that's a bit, that's a gift and is important as the challenge, because I know that some people find it really hard to focus on the good stuff because it's a pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Saba. It's so true, isn't it? You sometimes have to take that leap and sort of hear the strengths and what somebody's sharing with you and share it back with them and maybe get their thoughts on that if they're really struggling to do that themselves. Any other thoughts on this, on just that? I mean, it was a very quick exercise. Some of you may still be doing it. Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Yeah, I agree. I think it's really hard. I was just thinking, I was like, well, I'll think about that and I'll apply it to my mentoring and coaching practice. And it's funny, when like I feel like a session's not gone very well, I give that a lot of time and thought, and I think I can identify what went wrong, and maybe I could have done X, Y, or Z instead. And I'm very lucky I get supervision, so we go over these cases in depth. When I have a session that goes right, I can't work out what I've done right, or if I've even done anything right. You just often think, oh, that just went well. It was probably luck. Like I find it really hard to kind of reflect and learn about what went well, as opposed to, whereas I find it really easy to be like, yeah, okay, this is the thing that went wrong, and this is why I didn't feel so good, and this is what I could try differently. So yeah, so I find it hard, and I've definitely used it in mentoring and coaching, but I only use one thing, and people seem to find that awkward enough. So I'm really impressed if people can come up with three good things.
It's amazing though, isn't it? You think three, oh yeah, that's no problem. And then you actually go to do it and you go, wow, this is actually more challenging than I realized. So thanks for your honesty, Sarah, because I think actually a lot of us can relate to that. And, you know, medical training, a lot of the people I work with are going through medical training. It's kind of designed to focus on the deficit, isn't it? These are the competencies you haven't met yet. This is a lot of work is set up that way. So this can be a really nice one to do as a team as well in an organization, to check out at the end of the day with your team. Get people used to thinking in this way. Has anybody used this in their coaching practice and have any comments on how they find it?
I with the sort of support, one-to-one support stuff with the junior doctors particularly, a lot of them will find it very difficult to switch off at the end of the day and are going home going, oh my God, did I miss that? And what I could have done better there, and that sort of thing. So I'll suggest with them a lot about this, sort of just taking the time as they're walking home or cycling home or whatever to think about the three good things, and that doesn't have to be huge things, just little acts of kindness that they might have witnessed or that they might have been part of. That to just get into a habit of you're thinking about that rather than thinking about the tricky stuff on the way home. And gratitudes at bedtime. I don't know if you're coming on to gratitudes as part of positive psychology, but just, you know, to start becoming tiny habits that just take a couple of minutes in a day but can have such a big impact on overall how you're feeling about things.
Absolutely, Rachel. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you, Amy, for what you've typed in the chat. It's very honest of you to share. And yes, you've identified something, and it sounds like you're going, you know, that was a challenge, but you were able to do it. So, you know, well done on doing that. And it is often the small things we bypass and overlook, but that often matter quite a bit. As your example, it was really nice to see that outlined. I would say what can be useful is writing it down, because we all have bad days, very bad days. So in those moments, if we followed a bit of a practice of this, maybe at the end of the day, writing 3 good things, we can look back over that, and it can actually work as a bit of a way of challenging when we're, you know, just having a particularly bad day. I'm just going to take some time to read over this, just reflect on it. Lovely. So that one, it sounds simple, but it, as I said, what we find is it's often the small things that can make big shifts in how somebody's perceiving their day. I know an ED department made a poster based on this, where they asked people leaving the department to think about 3 things that went well in their day as part of this sort of checking out of work process. So that is definitely something to try and see how it goes. So going back to the Perma model then, and you'll find these will often overlap. I've kind of done this as a bit of a rough where we are in mapping this. But when we think about positive emotions and engagement, a big part of that, and it's been mentioned already by one of you, is in the identification of our strengths. And a bit like that exercise just there now, this does not come naturally to us at all. We find it really hard to think about things we're good at, things we've contributed to, and what our core strengths might be. But there is science behind it, and a number of studies have demonstrated that if we use our strengths and become more aware of our strengths, we can not only increase our well-being, but have less stress in our lives, feel more satisfied, more confident. So they saw people's confidence increase, increase our creativity and agility in our roles, increase the meaning in what we're doing and how engaged we feel in doing that. So we, rather than again focusing on that 80%, focusing on that 20% actually has big gains to be had. So for those we're coaching and those we're supporting in our roles, this can be a really, really key positive psychology tool to use with them. And there is a specific tool that you can tap into for this. So I can see Emma nodding on this, and I'm sure, Rachel, that you've used this one as well before. But there is a tool that's been used, I think it's been completed by millions of people, developed by Ryan Nemec and with input from Seligman's work. There is a really good book on it if you like big, thick book. But it's on it's the Character Strengths Interventions, a field guide for practitioners. What I love about it is in the middle, it breaks down each of the character strengths in terms of what it means, core features, questions for strength building in this particular strength, research highlights, and interventions that you can try to build this strength. So it's 1 page per strength. And that is actually a really, really useful tool as a coach to have this to hand. I sometimes photocopy the page for the top 5 strengths of my coachee and send it to them so that they have that as a resource to look at and reflect on and spend some time looking at. I can see a hand up by Emma. Yes.
Oh, sorry, I just remembered you said to put questions in the chat.
It's okay, it's fine. I think we have time.
Just about the VIA, could you use this in a group coaching, or would you say it's more of a one-to-one coaching, or could you apply this in a team session, do you think?
I mean, I know people who have done it, but I think you just need to be very careful about how people are with each other in the team. So if you've got a very close-knit team where people feel very happy sharing their strengths with each other, I think that would be fine. If you've got a team with a bit of tension in it where people might be guarded, then this is perhaps a bit revealing, and you might not have engagement. So I guess you would just, my thoughts on that are to be cautious as to how you would use that in a team setting. Obviously consent would need to be, people would need to know what it means getting involved in this. So what the VIA character strengths tool has done is, through their research, they found they wanted to know what were the sort of key, the main strengths that humans hold, and they found 24, and they're all sort of listed here in those lovely icons. So we all have 24 key strengths as humans, and they did sort of cross-cultural studies on this as well to identify these. But we will have some that we use more than others, and some that link with our values and the core of who we are more than others. So by completing the VIA character strengths tool, what it does is it sort of ranks your character strengths in terms of those that are your top strengths, right through to those you perhaps use less, or perhaps linked less to your sort of core values. And it looks a bit like this. And your deficit bias will mean that you'll probably go to the last pages and go, which ones am I most rubbish at? Let's look at these. We've all done it. We all do it. But I would say, don't do that. Don't be tempted to take that approach. Look at what your top 5 are, and explore these, get to know these, because this is you capitalizing on that 20%. This is you shutting the door on the deficit bias and spending some time getting to know who you are and what your strengths are. And what you'll probably find is that of those top 5, you'll probably have 3 which you go, God, that really is me. Yeah, I can see how those came through. I can see how those link with what I value. So you might value a sense of fairness. You might, that moral compass might be very strong for you. And so you might go, yeah, well, that makes complete sense. That is totally me. And that's why I find some situations where there is injustice occurring very, very difficult to deal with, because that's such a core value for me. So think about, which ones are resonating with you most, and that you feel defines most who you are. It's probably 3. It could be all 5. It might be none. It might have just got you completely wrong. But this tool has been carried out on millions of people, and so they've gone through a lot of sort of validation studies on this. So if you're happy, I think one of the good ways to try this is to give it a go. So I will paste this link into the chat. So if I just quickly stop sharing my screen so I can grab this for you. Bear with me, and I'll put it in the chat. And please, if there are any questions anybody wants to ask at this point, please do. So national strategic cultures will differ. British culture seems very negative focused. We are countering so many generationally encoded behaviors. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you know, you only have to look usually to your grandparents to know that even just talking about emotions is tricky for people. So there can definitely be cultural and generational issues. Sandra, sorry you have to leave. Take care and thanks for joining. So if you click on that, what I would love to do is for you to complete that. And then what we'll do with the help of Millie is we will put you into breakout rooms. So I'd say take until 3 o'clock to complete the strength survey, and then join your breakout room, or you can join it now, whichever you like. Millie, if we can do breakout rooms of between 2 and 3, 2 ideally, but if we need to do 3, that's fine.
I'll set them up whenever you like.
Fab. And then when you come back to your room, make a cup of tea or coffee, to have a chat with each other, have a coaching conversation around these strengths. What were your top 5? How can you use these more in your day to day? So what we often do is, because we're not aware of our strengths, we don't know how to use them more. And maybe how you already currently use them in your day to day, and just increasing that awareness. So let's say until 3:15. So we'll set up the breakout rooms, take the time yourself, go into the breakout room when you're ready, and have a chat with your partner about the results. Hi everyone. We could talk for so long on this, couldn't we? It never feels like enough time in these sessions, so apologies, but do try it out with other people. You know, do keep having these conversations if you can in other realms. So how was that sort of experience of completing the test, having a discussion about the results? Just put the slide up there. Oh,
so it was quite interesting for me and Emma, because we didn't do it now, we did it a while ago, so it was quite interesting seeing what they were without filling out the questions, if that makes sense, because we don't know what point we were at when we completed it necessarily, because that's why we were discussing whether this is something that's always ingrained in you, or whether it's something that is a snapshot in time.
Yes. It's such a good point. I think they sort of say, I would need to look it up. I thought it was every sort of 2 years or something. I'm looking to you, Rachel, because I'm not too sure if you. Yeah, I think it was around 2 years they sort of suggest redoing it, but it doesn't seem to be allowing you on the free option to do that, because certainly mine's quite dated at this stage.
But it wasn't like a shock. I would say that they were all like really relevant, but
Yeah.
It was quite interesting because we had a discussion about how some are definitely important to me, but then in certain situations I really struggle to use them, and then so that's why we were talking about that maybe it might be a really good reflection tool to have these, because if you're not using one of these strengths, maybe look at why you're not using that strength and what could be impacting that and how you could use that more to get satisfaction.
Mhm. Lovely. Absolutely. And you know, I often have conversations where people are thinking about maybe there's a different place I can apply this strength than in my job, for example, you know, if it's quite a restrictive setting, or thinking creatively about reinventing how they, you know, how they're using that strength at work. Lovely. Really interesting. I also completed it a while ago, and we described it, Karen and I, as it felt like an indulgence to reread your results. But isn't it interesting the way we even would say that word? Any other thoughts or comments from people about what you noticed completing that and having a conversation around it? Look in the chat here as well. Oh, Saba's Wi-Fi's gone. Oh, and somebody needs to answer the door. Okay. Daniela?
Yeah, it's just really useful because it gives you a good insight into when you're finding work challenging yourself, but why it's becoming challenging, because often it's perhaps those strengths that you've got at the top and don't fit with how work is at the moment, and so there's a disconnect between the two. So it's quite interesting. And looking at how it applies in different areas of your life, you know, like you say, if you really enjoy the beauty of the world, but that doesn't work because you're in a concrete box for 8 hours a day at work, or you know,
Yeah,
it's about trying to find perhaps ways of getting that joy from somewhere else, like joining a group that go, you know, you go walking and things like that on the weekends. I suppose it's trying to, like you say, think outside of the box a little bit and help people when you're coaching to not just focus on work being the place where all their needs need to be met, because that might not be achievable.
yes, lovely. And you know, there is, if this is a big thick book for a reason, you know, it's complex. You can overplay your strengths in some cases. In some cases you can underplay them, and sometimes that's appropriate, and sometimes it's not. So it's about really reflecting on, what do these strengths mean for me? How do I feel when I engage in them? You know, which ones do I want to engage in more? But is that appropriate for that scenario? Perhaps it's not. Perhaps I need to think about something else. So it's quite, what I like about tools like this is they're not about giving you complete answers. They're about starting a discussion for more exploration with your clients, I would say. And for some clients who are quite analytical, these types of tools they really like, because it starts a conversation without it being too nebulous and too sort of vague. So yeah, I hope that's been a bit of a sort of experience for you to think about how you use it in your practice, and perhaps it has a place or not for you in that. Was somebody going to come in there? I just saw somebody unmuting and then remuting. No, I'm conscious of time. So I did have another tool I wanted to share with you. I realize I've been ambitious with the time, but I'll talk you through this third one just to share with you. And it really focuses on that growth mindset aspect of when we're looking at goal setting and accomplishment. And I find sometimes when somebody's, you know, having coaching, it's perhaps more well-being coaching, and they're maybe feeling a bit low, but, you know, not low enough that they need therapeutic intervention, that goal setting can be challenging because they're not really sure if that's where they want to be at the minute. And Chris Johnson was a GP, and he came up with this SSRI model. And we know SSRIs is a group of antidepressant medication, and he was a GP and he used this deliberately. And it is outlined in Miriam Akhtar's book, which is Positive Psychology for Overcoming Depression. Again, it's in the reference list at the end of this. But this one I use quite a lot, actually, because what it does is it gets you to, you see, your client might have gone through a challenging situation, or you might ask them about, think about a time when you've been through a challenging situation. What we tend to do when we go through those challenging times is we get through them and we come out the other end and we go, so glad that's over with. Phew, move on and try and forget about that awful time. What we can do to develop a growth mindset is to reflect on those experiences in a different way. And this is what Chris's tool sets out to do. It really wants you to think about what strengths in that challenging scenario did you apply. So we've just done a strengths tool. You might think about your list of strengths and go, oh, well, of those, I definitely used that strength to get through that particular challenging time. We could, dare I say the word COVID, but what strengths did we use to get us through that time, on your strengths list? Or it could be a difficult financial period that you've experienced with your family. What strengths did you employ there? So these are the inner resources you've drawn upon at that time. So spend some time thinking about that and noting them down and just becoming more consciously aware of them. But also think about what strategies did I use to get me through that? It could be certain restorative activities. It could be a particular approach you took. For me, going for a walk is a strategy I use to process things, but it might be something else for someone else. So what were those strategies? And just try and bring those more to your conscious awareness. And what were the resources you access? So these are more the external things that you access. It might have been a person or a particular organization that you linked in with. What were they? Again, note them down. And what were the particular learning points or insights you developed from that experience? So all of this is sort of going, basically saying to somebody, you grew from that situation. You might not be aware that you did, but you did. And this is how we can look at that. This is how we can see that growth and explore that. And also by bringing those strengths and strategies and resources more to the forefront of someone's awareness that you're coaching, they're actually in a very good position to be able to tackle future challenges or, difficult scenarios. Has somebody saying this looks similar to apprentice inquiry? Was that appreciative inquiry or apprentice? I haven't heard of apprentice inquiry, but
sorry, it's appreciative inquiry. It's a type of.
Yes. Stanley, absolutely, completely agree. It's along those lines of appreciative inquiry. Has anybody used this approach or wants to feedback how it's gone?
Yeah, I think so in some of my coaching sessions, especially in the well-being coaching, I would ask patients, what is something that you have done in the past? It might be sometime when they have quit smoking or lost some weight. So I would ask them, how did that go? And what qualities did you use that time to achieve that result? Somebody would say, I have a very strong willpower, or I love my family. So that when they remember that point, that will give them so much energy, and they would say, okay, I never thought about that. Kind of reinforcing that, you have that same strength in you. You can use that same strength again here in this situation that you're in and overcome this challenge. So it's quite a good tool.
Yeah, absolutely. You use the word energizing, and I find that with this tool actually, and using it in practice, it can be very energizing for people because it's a very different approach, isn't it, to thinking about difficult, challenging situations. So thank you for sharing that, Stanley. So I am conscious of time and just aware. So I had built in time to practice this, but maybe you could sort of take it away and sort of reflect on these, how you might use this in your practice and what you might notice when you do this yourself and when you reflect on it yourself. Certainly I try and remind myself of this just as an individual. And I think in our breakout rooms, we were talking about how important it is to do these as a coach, so that you can be in a better place for your coachee. So, any final questions or thoughts from anyone on all of this, or reflections or things that you want to share? I love, Amy, the song lyrics you shared. Great.
I think it's been a really helpful overview and just some very practical things that we could try. And I like the structure, yeah, having a little go and practical.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I'm very much, I like to have like a toolkit box in the background with different things in it. And yeah, those were just some of the ones that I would regularly draw from that toolbox. So I hope they've been useful and generated some thoughts around all of that. Okay, well, this is just a ending quote, really, and particularly relevant for sort of healthcare, I think, at the minute. So I worked with a clinical psychologist on a burnout and moral distress toolkit recently. And one of the things that a lot of the people that I work with say is just how stormy the environment feels at the moment. Maybe it's been feeling like that for a number of years, politically and in a number of other ways. And what we can help people do, I think, through coaching is really help people focus on how resilient that boat is and reinforcing that boat and building it to be the best boat possible to withstand this storm. Because we can spend an awful lot of attention looking at the storm, but that's where the real work can be. So when I share these tools, I often think of that analogy. How can we strengthen our boat in these stormy conditions? I just like to end on that. And those are the books, and those are some of the other websites to reference. But thank you very much for coming along today and contributing. And I'm sorry it couldn't be longer. I just feel like this could be a whole half day, getting people together to go over it. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tasha. Fantastic session.
Thank you.
Really helpful. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.